What's up guys, welcome back to the Piston Show. I'm Kashi Dylan and today we are driving the GWM Tank 500, launched recently for the Malaysian market at the recently concluded Malaysian Auto Show. It's priced at 328,000 ringgit, but it's not exactly a new model. You see it in quite a few markets such as in Australia and the Middle East. So there's plenty of content out there already on the GWM Tank 500. But in this video, I'm going to talk about the Tank 500 in a Malaysian perspective. Right now, I'm in Elmina and about to embark on a drive with the Tank 500 to Penang, spend the day and come back tomorrow, which will roughly give me about 800 to 900 kilometers, perhaps close to 1,000 kilometers with the Tank 500, which is more than enough to let you know how it is in traffic. Penang's legendary traffic will be great to check out the fuel efficiency of the car. Besides that, I'll also get to try it out on the highway, so I'll get a chance to find out how the refinement is like, how the suspension is like. So if you're interested in the Tank 500, this is the video that you should watch. 328,000 ringgit. Well, it promises a lot because this is a car that goes up against the likes of the legendary Toyota Land Cruiser Prado and such. But how is it like on our Malaysian roads? Stick around to find out. So how do the back seats of the GWM Tank 500 feel? Well, this is important because there's a certain demographic that might buy this car to be driven in. We see that a lot recently where people buy a car to be driven in and sorts. And for 328,000 ringgit, the GWM Tank 500 is actually a decent car to be driven in, particularly when it comes to spaciousness and perhaps comfort. But you got to keep in mind that this is a car that has been built on a leather frame chassis, and what that basically means that this is a proper off-roader. It has all the electronic gremlins that you need to go off-roading. But then again, when it comes to comfort, not so much, because ultimately this is a capable off-roader. As I've said, it's hardcore and such. But then again, you don't get adaptive suspension, you don't get any of that. So you feel everything that the road throws up at it, even the tiny niggles. I don't mind it actually because I'm actually a very bad passenger. So when it comes, it's something that I felt with the Denza D9, particularly the premium all-wheel drive variant, where you got something called D-C. And in terms of absorbing everything, the suspension on the Denza did really well, but then it did so well that I couldn't feel anything. Ultimately, I felt nauseated. But now here, not so much. Even though I'm feeling everything that the road is throwing up, every single bit, every tiny nugget or every single dip, I feel it. So if you want something that isolates you from the horrors of the road underneath, then maybe this may not be the car for you. But then again, it just reminds me of how SUVs used to be like, where you feel everything. And well, I belong to that generation, so I really don't mind it. Now, in terms, what does leather frame chassis actually mean? Leather frame chassis basically means that the cabin and the engine compartment, the boot and such, was built separately from the chassis and then bolted on later. So you see this a lot with light pickup trucks, commercial vehicles and such. And they do this because it's more robust, it's more hardcore, it lasts longer, and you can rely on it to go off-roading, you can rely on it to tow stuff and such. So a leather frame chassis is more robust over the long term. But then comfort takes a hit. So you can probably see me bouncing around a little bit, you know, you feel the dips and such. So So in that sense, the GWM Tank 500 may not be the ideal car to be driven in, but then again, check out the amount of space that I have. The seats are ventilated, I'm comfortable, the rear seat is reclinable even though I have to do it manually. And in that sense, if I was a tauke kayu bala, or or transportation mogul and such, and I needed a car that could go some light off-roading so that I can go and spy on my drivers and make sure all my workers are actually doing their job, the Tank 500 is not a bad deal. But then if you're looking for a car to be driven in on a day-to-day basis, to send your kids to school and such, then perhaps not. So after this, I'll be taking the driver's seat, and then from there, tell you how it is to drive. Now, before we start to drive, let me just take you on a little tour of the interior, show you all the fit and finishing and the buttons and a couple of things that I think you should know. Now, as you can see, it's actually quite a tall car. This, after all, has a water wading depth capability of 800 millimeters. So it definitely built for some proper off-roading. So it's actually quite a tall car. So getting in and out, especially for shorter passengers, might be an issue. And that is why when you open the door, you get a side step that pops out just so that you can actually step on it and get into the car, just like you would in a Range Rover. So guys, this is the interior of the GWM Tank 500. Looks like a nice place, doesn't it? It is actually quite a nice place, and in typical Chinese car fashion, you get a gigantic infotainment screen complete with wireless Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, and I really like this thing. This analog clock over here looks very, very plush. Looks very elegant, in fact. Unfortunately, we have been reduced to only being given digital clocks these days. So that's why when I see an analog clock like the one over here, I actually get quite excited. So most of the time, you get an analog clock like this. Unfortunately, that is how it is these days. And this wood-like finishing, well, it's not exactly wood. It's something that looks like wood, but it looks very elegant, no doubt. And a couple of things that you should know, if you noticed over here, most of the buttons over here are to control the four-wheel drive systems, the onboard, the ventilation seats, your braking. This button over here gives you quick access to all your ADAS systems and such. This actually lets you choose between the drive modes. So talking about drive modes, you get normal, sport, eco, snow, mud, sand, 4High, and you actually have to go all the way back to let me see, what do I need to do to go back to normal. There you go. So this car actually has 11 different driving modes. 11. But this is a combination of on-road as well as off-road driving modes. Will you ever use 11 driving modes? Let me know in the comment section below, but I don't think so. Anyway, if you've noticed over here, in this part here, there is no dedicated volume button. So the thing is, this can be a bit of an issue, as we found out earlier when we were driving. So the only way to control the volume is through this over here, and this is for the driver. But if you are a passenger and you want to control the volume of the entertainment system, you will have to do this. Swipe down, and this is your volume button over here. Not a big deal. But if you have Apple CarPlay playing, suddenly you cannot access the volume button. So this, maybe you can help me out over here, but we were not able to find the volume button. So in case you're the passenger over here and you want to reduce the volume, you either have to tell the driver to do it, or you have to do this. Go back to your home menu and swipe down and then adjust the volume. Quite a lot of work. So besides that though, everything else feels nice, feels good, and even the seats are pretty comfortable. For the passenger, you get 6-way adjustability. I think for the driver, you get 8 or 10-way adjustability. The back seats are quite comfortable, as I've told you about earlier. And basically everything feels rather nice. Does it feel like a 328,000 ringgit car? I'm about to take this for a drive. So I rode at the back seat just now. I rode the passenger seat earlier from KL to here in Ipoh, and now we're about to go to Penang, and I'm about to captain the GWM Tank 500. Let me tell you how it feels like on the highway and such. I'll be right back. Alright, so about to hit the highway and head to Penang, as I've said. But before we do that, let me just get the essentials out of the way. I want to talk to you a little bit about what is powering the GWM Tank 500. Now, for the Malaysian market, up ahead is a 2-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. Now, this is not just a regular engine, it is actually mated to an electric motor. So that basically makes this a hybrid powertrain. And so you basically get a output from the engine and output from the motor as well. So the engine will give you 244 PS and 318 Newton meters of torque. That is from the engine alone. And the electric motor will give you 106 PS and 268 Newton meters of torque. Now you will get a combined combined power figure of 346 PS and 648 Newton meters of torque. How this feels like on the highway, I'm about to find out. And power is sent to either all 4 wheels or 2 wheels, depending on what mode you're in, through a 9-speed hybrid automatic transmission. Now, the thing about this powertrain is that a couple of countries where the GWM Tank 500 already exists are reporting that this powertrain can be quite thirsty, particularly in traffic. And according to some reported fuel consumption figures, some are reporting fuel consumption figures as high as 17.6 litres per 100 km. But I am seeing a fuel consumption figure of 12.3 litres per 100 km. So in that sense, I think that the GWM Tank 500, being this big, heavy, hefty car and such, well, 12.3 litres I think can be expected lah. But how will it do in heavy traffic situations such as in Penang and such? I'm about to find out. What else can I tell you is that the GWM Tank 500 also has an intelligent 4-wheel drive system with electronically controlled front and rear differential locks with a mechanical center locker. I've already told you that it comes with 11 different driving modes, and you also get something called a tank turn assist. This helps with tight maneuvers by locking the inside rear wheel. So if you're turning to the right, it locks the right wheel, which works like an anchor and lets you turn this car in a tighter turning radius. So in that sense, I think the Tank 500 is perfectly adapted to life either on the highway in urban conditions or even on off-road situations. So now we go hit the highway with the Tank 500. Let's see how it is. So it's been over an hour that I've been sitting behind the wheel of the Tank 500. And I gotta say that it's been a little bit of a bittersweet experience, because there are things about the car that I like and there are things about it that I think can be better. So I'm going to start with what I think can be better. The brake feel is one thing. You know, it has a very inconsistent feel to it. You're never able to know at what point you're going to feel the bite. But after a while, you sort of get used to it. It just feels a little bit spongy, but that, I guess, has become a typical character of sorts for serious off-roaders, because no matter what you think of the Tank 500, it has all the capabilities to become a serious off-roader. Now, besides that, the accelerator feel is also something that you sort of have to get used to, because every time you're accelerating and you take your foot off, just for about half a second or so, the car will still continue to accelerate. So that is something that will catch you off guard the first time you start driving the Tank 500, but after a while, you sort of get used to it. Now, the Tank 500 also does not like to be hustled. It does not like to be driven very fast. It doesn't like to be driven, simply said, in anger. But this, after all, to be fair, is not a car that you buy to drive fast and such. As I was saying earlier, this is a car that you buy when you need when you need a touch of comfort, and you also need a little bit of off-roading capabilities, because perhaps your work requires that and such. In that sense, the Tank 500 can deliver. But having said that, the GWM Tank is actually quite comfortable when you are driving on very smooth tarmac, when you are cruising between 100 to 120 kilometers per hour. I just got to say that the refinement levels in here are just brilliant. I'm stuck in traffic right now, merging into the the first bridge onto Penang Island. You could probably see the amount of cars around me, and the thing is, I don't hear much of anything at all besides the police siren that we were hearing earlier. But these trucks that are passing by, I don't see any motorcycles over here, but earlier you hear very little of the world outside, and that is what ultimately the Tank 500 does quite well. It cocoons you in relative comfort. But as I've experienced earlier, this being, because it's built on a leather frame, you do feel all the dips, the ruts, all the niggles on the road underneath it. And yes, you do feel it from the driver's seat as well. Not as much as from the back, but you still do feel it. So at 328,000 ringgit, who will the Tank 500 appeal to? Now, it's priced very strategically, because you got to consider that the Tank 300 is priced at 250,000 ringgit. At 328,000 ringgit, it's priced obviously above the Toyota Fortuner. This obviously gives you a lot more luxury than the Toyota Fortuner. The Ford Everest is another SUV that would appeal to some who want the spaciousness and such. But then again, if you are willing to spend about 50 to 60,000 ringgit more, the Tank 300 will probably give you more of that luxurious touches as compared to a Ford Everest. Now though, it's priced right underneath the Toyota Land Cruiser that you can get on the parallel import market from grey importers and such. So a Toyota Land Cruiser will probably cost you back slightly over 400,000, 450, 460, and that, after all, is a recon unit. And you got to keep in mind that with the Tank 500, you're buying a brand new vehicle, complete with factory warranty, with dealer warranty and such. So in that sense, it's priced rather strategically. But GWM Malaysia will still have a mountain to climb to convince people to spend that much of money on a China branded car. When it comes to Chinese brands in Malaysia, I would throw my weight behind GWM. But then you also got to consider that at 328,000, it's one of the more expensive Chinese cars in Malaysia. The only cars that are more expensive than this from China particularly are the likes of the Zeekr 009. Even the Denza D9 premium all-wheel drive is slightly cheaper than this. So definitely the Zeekr. Of course, you'll get more coming in later, but for now, is it a very big ask for the Malaysian consumer to spend this much money on a Chinese brand? Well, I still got another day with this car. So I'm going to come back to you with more insights about the Tank 500. So day 2 with the GWM Tank 500, we're about to head back to KL. But I just had some time to reflect on the car And it just got me wondering, who would this car appeal to in fact? For 328,000 ringgit, it's actually quite a lot of money. And there's no doubt that those that buy this car will want something that is comfortable, will want enough space for their children, they'll want enough space to perhaps be driven in as well. And the GWM Tank 500 delivers on all of that. And despite it being built on a leather frame chassis, I think that it's, and you feel everything, yeah, don't get me wrong, you feel everything that the road throws up at you. But that's a typical trait of the leather frame chassis. But the thing is about it, the insulation is brilliant. The fact that it really isolates you from the world outside is fantastic. So if you ever get a chance to drive the GWM Tank 500, look out for the refinement levels. Really tune in to what's happening on the world outside and just sort of hear, because I can almost guarantee you that you will not be hearing much. So for 328,000, you're looking at competitors such as the BMW X3, a couple of cars from the parallel import market, the grey import market, and then besides that, obviously the car that actually inspired the Tank 500, the legendary Land Cruiser. But the thing about us here in Malaysia is that we do not get a brand new Land Cruiser. So if you're going to be looking at buying the Land Cruiser, you're going to be looking at the recon market, which means that you won't get a proper warranty, you get the Japanese spec. And what I do not like about Japanese spec cars, doesn't matter Alphard or GR86 or whatever, I don't like the fact that the infotainment system and all of the key controls about the car are all in Japanese. But you will not get that with the GWM Tank 500, because this is built in Thailand. Now we take it for a drive back to KL, and I'll come back with my final conclusion about the car. So more time behind the wheel obviously showcases more things about the car. Things that I like and things that I think can be better. So yesterday I found that the judders that are quite evident because of the leather frame chassis, yesterday I found that to be annoying. Today, not so much. Perhaps it's because that I have come to expect it. So with that, it probably sits at the back of my mind, but it's not so obnoxious anymore. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that I think that this car, despite it being a leather frame chassis, built on a leather frame chassis, I would go so far as to say that this is probably the most comfortable SUV that has been built on a leather frame chassis in Malaysia, at least. Because considering the competition, this is actually quite nice. And it does all of that without actually relying on adaptive suspension. So it truly actually feels really nice. In terms of power, over 600 Newton meters of torque is quite substantial. But in all honesty, you really do not actually feel it. Perhaps it's the refinement, but with over 600 Newton meters of torque, if you flex your right foot, there's always a gentle shove into the seat, particularly in big luxurious SUV like the GWM Tank 500. But then you don't get that push. This is a car that weighs between 2,400 to 2,500 kilograms. It's a big, heavy car. And that is why I'm of the opinion that a 3-liter V6 engine would have probably suited this car better in terms of delivering power, getting up to speed and such. I know GWM has a 3-liter option for the Tank 500 in some other markets, but I can also understand why they did not introduce it here, perhaps from a road tax perspective. The bigger your engine capacity, the more money you have to pay. But then again, I'm looking at a fuel consumption figure of 10.9 liters per 100 km. This was reset from the beginning when we started off from Gurney Drive in Penang, and now we have just passed Tapa and we are on to Elmina Lakeside Shopping Mall. So it's going to be a mix of highways and perhaps a little bit of traffic later. But 10.9 litres per 100 km is the best that I've seen. Yesterday I was looking at between 12.3 to 12.5 litres. So again, I think a 3 litre V6 engine would have been really sweet. But then it wouldn't have costed 328,000, perhaps a little bit more expensive. You know, big engines, more material and such, so more expensive lah. It's natural. And then having spent more time behind the wheel and more time in the passenger seats and such has also revealed some other things about the car, particularly all the ADAS functions and all the advanced driver aid systems. This is typical of Chinese cars. They love to, you know, whistle and, you know, ring a bell and such and try to correct everything that you're doing. So what I've been doing today is I actually turned off every single feature in the car. It has a lot of features, guys, so if you're really particular about safety, I don't think you'll be disappointed with the Tank 500, but then you have to be quite prepared for it to be constantly nagging you. Of course, you can do it my way and turn everything off. It still works fine. Besides that, I also think that a volume button, which is something I mentioned yesterday, a dedicated volume button would have been perfect. And the other thing is, the front passenger doesn't have a USB for him or her. The USB ports for the front are actually located closer to the driver's side, so you really need a very long cable for the front passenger to access USB charging and connectivity and such. Or you can rely on the back USB ports, which you still need a really long cable for. Other than that though, I think that one of the biggest attractions of the Tank 500 is still its refinement. Now, the Tank 500 is one of the only SUVs that I know that has double glazed windows, not only at the front, that's quite common, even cars like the CX-5 have it, but this also has double glazed windows at the back. So the refinement levels in this car is brilliant. So at 328,000 ringgit, I think that this would appeal to anyone that is considering an X3, an X5, a Mercedes-Benz GLE and such. Those cars are obviously more expensive, except for the X3, which is just about the price point of the Tank 500, but that would be the base variant, which is called the X-Drive 20, if I'm not mistaken. So from a pricing perspective alone, I think this is very well priced. I think anybody considering what I mentioned just now, the X5 GLE, should definitely take a look at the Tank 500. The biggest thing that you have to overcome is the badge on the steering wheel. So if you can look past the badge on the steering wheel, as I said earlier, and you can actually appreciate the car for what it has to offer, then I believe the GWM Tank 500, in fact, is worth a good look, a good hard look. But if you still are wondering how the Tank 500 brand is going to be like over the next few years, then guess what? GWM Malaysia is covering you with an extensive warranty program, up to 6 years on the vehicle and 8 years plus on the powertrain and such. So in that sense, I think the GWM Tank 500 is a proper, solid proposition as compared to some of the competitors in the same segment or even in the same price range. Because remember, from a sizing point of view, the GWM Tank 500 is somewhere about the Land Cruiser size-ish, but from a pricing point, is somewhere between the entry-level BMW X3-ish. So let me know what you think about the GWM Tank 500 and a couple of the things that you would like to know. Just ask me in the comment section below. Do consider subscribing, guys. Thank you for watching.